It was a real pleasure representing Jacob and helping he and his wife through his case. Jacob's case presented a classic example of what happens when a person continues to work for a company after their injury. Jacob sustained a bad head injury while he was working on an oil rig, and to his credit, he stayed out there as long as he could. One of the biggest challenges we had with this case was that the company was using the weeks and even months that he stayed out there after his injury against him once he ultimately had to file suit. We filed a Jones Act claim for Jacob, and we also filed a third-party case against one of the other companies that was on the rig because they were both responsible for his injury. We successfully recovered money from both companies for Jacob and his family. Jacob, like a lot of our clients, suffered a head injury. We've handled many cases where people have had traumatic brain injuries in the past. One of the biggest challenges with those cases, just like it was in Jacob's case, is that typically the imaging of the brain, what you see on the test in the imaging, can indicate a brain injury, but it can also be explained away by company-hired experts due to other causes and other symptoms. So in Jacob's case, we face that just like we have in other cases where the company will come in, they'll hire an expert that they buy and pay for, and that expert will then a lot of times try to dismiss what's seen on the films as just normal aging and a normal wear and tear process in someone's brain. In our case, we successfully were able to argue that it really resulted from his accident out on the rig, and this was not something that you would expect to see in a normal, healthy, developed brain of an adult. We had multiple experts that are pretty typical in a serious case like Jacob had. We had a liability expert. This is just a fancy word for a fellow who came in and said what was done wrong and why the companies were at fault and why Jacob was not at fault. That's just as important. Sometimes experts are brought in to critique or criticize the company's actions, but it's just as important that they can back up and support what the injured party did, because at the end of it, the companies try to blame the injured party, so to have a good expert in there explaining that he didn't do anything wrong is very important. Another expert that we brought in was a life care planner, and this is a fancy word for basically an expert that comes in, visits with the family, visits with the client, figures out the kind of stuff that they have trouble doing around their house. Maybe they need a little more help than they used to before the accident, and they come up with a laundry list. It's literally a itemized list of stuff that they need, help they need around the house, and the cost of that. So that created an amount in addition to his pain and suffering, in addition to his wages, in addition to his actual medical costs like surgeries, etc. That's called a life care planner. That was one of the experts we used. Another expert we had was a job expert. Because of the nature of Jacob's injury, it was questionable what type of work, if any, he could do in the future. And so this expert comes in. Jacob, like a lot of offshore fellows and a lot of fellows who work on boats and barges, he was from a small town. Because of that, the job expert has to know that area, has to be able to explain there's not much they can do back home once their career is ended off the rigs or the boats. So we brought the job expert in, and then an economist, just a very basic expert. This fella is someone who takes the dollar amounts that they are today. He figures out what does that mean 5, 10, 20 years down the road, and he does this discounting, they call it, in court, and he will come into court if necessary at trials. He comes in and explains this is the whole amount that they need today to spread out the rest of their life to really get back to where they should be. So those were some of the experts that we had in Jacob's case, and I think they really helped to show what he went through. It helped to, the biggest thing you're doing in a case like this is trying to paint a picture for the jury. You want the jury to kind of see, the whole story as it goes through. What happened, who's responsible, what immediate issues happen, such as surgery in this case, and then where are they going to be in 5 years or 10 years? And to do that, a lot of times you slot experts in along the way, and those were some of the experts that we needed in a case like this. Even though Jacob's injury and the fact that he had an accident on the rig was very clear, his case still took time to develop. It took hiring the right experts. We went through an initial phase of sitting down with the companies trying to resolve this case, and they actually offered 10% of what they ultimately ended up paying. And people would look at the case and they would tell us, other attorneys, they'd say this is a no-brainer, they're going to pay the money right away. Clearly this is an open and shut case, that type of language. Even in a situation like this, it takes work, it takes getting the right experts, it takes being able to show these companies, when we go to court, this is exactly what we will prove, and you need to pay a reasonable settlement or we're simply going to go to court. And Jacob's case, even in his case, it took 2 or 3 steps to get them, bring them along and get them to that point where they did pay a very fair amount for he and his family. The companies honestly realized that we weren't going to back down. They started with very low numbers. We ended up having to go to the court. The court sort of told them their numbers were low. We ultimately went through another settlement process. I think it took bringing the experts on board, it took going the distance, and that's what contributed to a very, very good settlement for he and his wife. Jacob himself actually was a wonderful client, just a very, very nice individual, and that does go a very long way in getting a company to pay what's fair in cases. Fortunately, the case worked out great for Jacob. He and his family have enough money where he never has to work again in his life, and we're very proud to have represented Jacob and to help he and his family through this very tough time that they had.